Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be looking at the times that the porn stars absolutely screwed customers over. Obviously, all pawn shops have to buy at a lower than market value, so they are able to make enough profit to keep the shop running. That being said, the value of these items is completely subjective and dependent on lots of factors like the rarity and condition, as well as how desperate the seller is for cash. Up first, we have A Book by the famous Sir Isaac Newton. When Bob, a seller from season 3, walks through the doors of Gold and Silver with a copy of a 450-year-old book on alchemy that he believes is from Isaac Newton's library, he knows he has something special on his hands. Of course, the old man calls in rare book expert Gary, who informs everyone that it is indeed a book from the famous thinker's collection, although the cover had been restored and rebacked, probably done in the 1700s. Still, Gary places the retail value of the book at $20,000. Amazingly, Bob then accepts the old man's shockingly low offer of $7,000. After being told, if I give you 7 for it, I won't have money for dinner tonight. Apparently, the old man pays over $13,000 for a meal. Just to put a bow on top of this plainly awful deal, it turns out much of the rest of Newton's book collection has either been destroyed or archived at Trinity College, Cambridge in the UK, meaning in reality, this tome is actually a priceless piece of history. Up next, we have the time when in the season 4 episode Peacemaker, Rick buys an eponymous 1890s Colt 45 revolver, which he says sells better than just about any antique gun I carry. Rick's excitement is palpable, especially after the seller, Brian, foolishly reveals he purchased it for $25. They eventually agree on a price of $3,000, but when Rick gets his gun expert in, he states that the gun is worth at least $5,000 in its current condition. But in fact, depending on exactly how rare the specific model is, it could be worth much more. For instance, the first Colt 45 Peacemaker, originally manufactured in 1873, was sold at auction in 1987 for a whopping $242,000. Another time when the porn stars were gifted an item on the cheap by the customer selling himself short was when field artillery collector Chuck rolled his 1890 Hotchkiss cannon into the parking lot of Gold and Silver Porn, aiming to land a deal. Things were looking up when Rick asked his weapon expert, "What can I pay for it and still make a few bucks?" To which he replied, "I would say $40,000 all day long." Of course, Chuck is pleased, but then he immediately commits the fatal flaw of any negotiation, which is to reveal his bottom line number before the haggling even begins. "I expected about $30,000, Chuck says, instantly alleviating himself of a potential 10 grand. Rick seizes on Chuck's misstep and immediately agrees to the $30,000, as long as the cannon still fires. And it does, and then they shake on the deal. Obviously, you could say, well, that's the seller's fault for undercutting himself, but clearly Rick knew what he was doing and expertly capitalised on the seller's low expectation. And finally, we have an item where the seller was so desperate to sell, he didn't really care what it was for. The seller, David, claimed to be a lawyer who'd kept a sword after a client used it as collateral, then failed to return to claim it. Just before the haggling started, Corey admitted via backroom confessional that he'd seen a few of these sell for $1,000, which is why his opening offer of $800 was laughably shady. The seller, woefully unprepared for the negotiation, said, "When he offered me $800, I wanted to jump and do a dance, but I had to keep my cool because the price was still going up." They agreed on $1,500, and an expert later determined it to be worth around $5,000 to $6,000 in its current condition. However, should Corey be willing to do a $3,000 restoration, he could fetch as much as 15 grand for it.